I had a young lady say, she told me she was an atheist. So I said, why are you an atheist? And she said, because I can only believe things that are backed up by logic and evidence. So I'm going to use her words, and I'm going to ask the next question. So what logic and evidence do you have for the belief there's no God? And she said, well, the Bible's full of contradictions. Now, most Christians here are going to immediately begin defending Scripture. This is where I call the lazy approach. My response wasn't to defend Scripture or give her evidence. I responded with a question. And how does that prove there's no God? And she looked stunned because no one's ever asked her that. It's as if she's never had to defend that.
Well, we just had a fun weekend at Maven this past weekend. We were in Texas at the Maven conference.
Fun?
Why? Oh my gosh.
Fun, honey. It's feels like we've been hungover for 2 days. We're so exhausted and so tired.
We are, but we're getting older.
Actually, I don't know what it's like to actually be hungover. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Sure, buddy. Well, we are getting older, so busy weekends do wear us out.
No, we had an awesome time. We just pulled off our first Maven conference outside of California. We've been doing the Maven conference for 5 years in California and love our California family. But what we found is that we have had people travel from all kinds of other states in for the conference. And one of our visions has been to take this conference to other parts of the country, because it's not always reasonable or doable for a family to, get out for the conference. So we did last weekend. So the weekend after Labor Day, second weekend in September, we did our first Maven conference in Texas, and had over 300 people that were in attendance at that conference. Worked with a great church, Frisco Bible Church. I mean, that conference was an absolute hit, if we can say so ourselves. I mean, the response from the people that were there, we had people from all parts of Texas. People came in from Austin, from the Houston area.
I talked to a couple gals who'd driven from Oklahoma, Anna and, I'm forgetting the other gal's name, but they drove in from Oklahoma. So that was cool. To hear from them. And we know there were people from other parts. Well, Texas is a big state.
Yeah,
so
well,
just
Texas
even
is
driving.
like 16 states in one. So, I mean, we had people basically from 16 states.
We did.
But it was, if you haven't experienced the Maven conference, it's hard to kind of put it into words. How great these conferences are. And of course, we're not just saying that because we put them on. We have been to a lot of conferences. We've been to a lot of Christian events, and we do really think, in all honesty and all sincerity, that this is one of those top-notch events because of, I think, the excellence that we put into it, but also the content, the speakers, the themes. These are things that are culturally relevant to families, to grandparents, to educators, to homeschoolers, to pastors. And so the feedback we got was absolutely tremendous. So what we want to do is get it on your radar. If you're listening, you've got to, and you haven't been to a Maven conference, or maybe you've been and you went once or twice and you're like, yeah, that was great, but you haven't made it a priority. In 2024, make the Maven conference a priority, because we know that you will be equipped and encouraged and inspired and motivated by being with like-minded believers and being challenged by some of the best speakers out there on worldview and cultural issues. So let me give you 2 dates. Write these down. If you want to come to California, the Maven conference is happening February 23rd and 24th. If you want to come to Texas, we're doing our second annual Texas conference, Texas Maven Conference, September 6th and 7th. So get those dates on your calendar for 2024. Join us at a Maven conference. You won't regret it. I mean, just got so much feedback. And we had parents that even brought their students. And I had a junior higher, or a middle schooler, and a high schooler come up to me after the conference, just glowing. They were so happy. They said the conference was so helpful, and they said they were coming back next year for sure.
Yeah, I talked to a few teachers that attended the conference, and So it was good to hear from them and how it was so encouraging for them just in working with their students. And they were parents also, but teachers. So it was a good weekend.
Well, that's an understatement. You're just right. I mean, that's not just a good weekend. It was a life-changing weekend. I mean, you're humble, honey. And you don't want to overclaim, but hey, the feedback we got was amazing. And now if this sounds like one big commercial, hey, I want you to know it actually is. Because we want you at the Maven conference, but we want you there because we think this is the kind of event that really has a big impact. We've seen it time and time again. And this is part of our vision of Maven, is to equip the church all around the U.S. And in fact, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are supported by donors, and to make this vision happen, we need supporters who will come alongside, be partners with us in this work, and help us to expand the work of Maven through the conference, through the podcast, through our immersive experiences, all the things that we're doing. And so I would encourage people, if you're listening, maybe you were at the conference in Texas, consider going to maventruth.com. And in the right-hand corner, there's the donate button. Become a monthly supporter. We need a team of supporters to help expand this work that is so important to equipping the church in this cultural moment.
And speaking of our team, at the conference, we recorded a podcast episode with one of our team members here at Maven, Eric Hernandez. He is a part of Texas Baptist, but also is on the Maven team and helps lead some of the immersive experiences, the trips to Utah and to college campuses and things that we do with students called immersive experiences. So we interviewed Eric there to let you get to know him a little bit. He's a dad and in ministry and doing lots of things, just wrote a book. But also just to get his perspective on the immersive experiences and what he's seen happen in the lives of students. So we recorded a podcast with him, and that's what you get to listen to today.
Welcome to the Maven Parent Podcast. We are at the 2023 Texas Maven Conference.
We are live.
We're live in Frisco, Texas.
We are not in California.
I am used to being in California.
It is 106 degrees outside. We are not in California.
This is definitely
anymore.
not California. California is not this hot where we live.
No.
And I will never come back here again. So this is our last time here in Frisco, Texas. Summer, wherever you're at, it was good partnering with you this one time. Okay. But we are here at the first ever Maven Texas Maven Conference, and doing a podcast with someone who is a friend. He's also an enemy at the same time. No, we go back a long ways, probably 2 years. No,
Oh, God. You can't give us straight. I'll introduce
This is going to
him.
be
Poor
45
guy.
minutes of sarcasm. And it's going to bless people. It's going to bless people. No, we are here with a good friend. We would consider him a good friend. Or at least I would consider him a good friend. Erin, would you weigh in? Do you consider him a good friend too?
Oh my gosh.
Just put you on the spot here for a second.
Okay, so anyways, Eric not only is a good friend, he works with Maven and is a field guide for us. So we're gonna get into his story a little bit. Are you gonna actually read the introduction?
Absolutely.
Okay, if you're gonna be serious, I'll let you have the microphone.
Oh, it's time
back.
to be serious. Erin
Okay,
said
go
it's
ahead.
time to be serious.
Go ahead.
So this is Eric Hernandez. He's one of our ethnic friends.
We're cutting this out. Of the
No, we're
recording.
keeping that part in.
No.
I can say that because
that's right.
I'm a non-white. So, Eric Hernandez is a good friend here in Texas, the state of Texas. He is actually the Apologetics lead and millennial specialist. God bless you.
That's a
for the
hard
Baptist General Convention of Texas, a millennial specialist
Wow.
in our presence.
Wait, are you a millennial, Eric?
I am. That's right.
I thought you were. Okay.
Oh, wow. So
Interesting.
you're reaching your own people.
Yeah.
Okay, he's an apologist, an evangelist. He debates atheists in his free time. And he is the author of a brand new book called The Lazy Approach to Evangelism, husband to one wife still.
That's right.
Kendall.
That's right.
And father of 2 kids. And now this part, folks, it's probably gonna shock you, but it literally, and this is, in all honesty, this is not sarcasm. His favorite food is Taco Bell.
That's right.
So for most of you, that right there, you lost a lot of respect.
It's all right.
But that's okay. You're still made in God's image. So
Thank you.
And
you.
Eric is the author of a new book that we're going to talk to him about, The Lazy Approach to Evangelism, a simple guide for conversing with non-believers. So this is your new book that's out, Eric. So we are going to talk to you about that. But Eric is a friend and works with us at Maven, helping to lead our unique trips that we do with students called Immersive Experiences. We've talked about it a little bit on the podcast, but since we're with Eric in Texas, we thought, this is a good opportunity for people to hear from one of our actual field guides who takes students and do these crazy trips that we do. So we first, though, Eric, want to start just for people to get to know you. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up, and did you grow up in a Christian home? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I did grow up in a Christian home. Been a Christian as long as I can remember all my life. But I've always been one to ask questions. Like I remember even being 5 years old, my feet could barely reach the floor of the car, which isn't saying too much. But I know I was that young.
That was a perfect moment for sarcasm, and I just held back. I just want you to know.
Oh, yeah.
I just held
I threw it in
back.
there for you. And I just remember asking my mom something like, what was God doing before he created the earth? Was he lonely? Was it dark? And, just being really young, asking questions. But growing up in youth group, that got me in trouble a couple times. I remember at least 2 occasions where a couple of my youth leaders would actually discourage me from asking questions. And that bothered me because they would say after every service, invite your non-saved friends next week. And I thought, no, why would I want to do that when I, as a Christian, can't ask questions? And then I remember one time my youth pastor said something like, if anyone ever tells you to prove to them God exists, all you have to say is, prove to me he doesn't. And I thought, that's brilliant. I'm going to put it in my back pocket. I'll use it whenever I need it. So
And that's
year of
how you
college-
own the atheist.
That's right. That's all you got to do. Freshman year of college, I needed to take some electives to fill up. And there was a class offered in philosophy 101. Now, I wanted to take a class that I could skip and, that I wouldn't have to pay attention. And I thought, well, philosophy is just sharing your opinion and making stuff up. And I thought, I can do that on my sleep. So I took philosophy.
Sorry, go
Were you
ahead.
gonna say something
I was
sarcastic?
actually going to make a joke.
Okay,
No,
go
I didn't
ahead.
believe you. So first week of class, my professor says, this week we're going to talk about something known as a burden of proof. And essentially it's the idea that if you make a claim that something's true, you bear the burden to prove it. And then he said, as a random example, which I later found out wasn't random because he was an atheist, but he said, if you're a Christian here today and you claim God exists and someone says to prove it, you cannot say, prove to me he doesn't, because then you are inappropriately shifting the burden of proof. Because if you make the claim, you bear the burden.
Yeah.
And I felt like my house of cards collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that intrigued me, though. It made sense. And from then on, I just kind of fell in love with philosophy. And one of the reasons is because I was allowed to ask questions. So fast forward into the semester, loved it, very even-handed. He was very fair with what he presented. And I wanted to take another class in philosophy. And every one of my peers said, if you're going to take another class, whatever you do not take Professor Pena's class. Not only is he an atheist, he's antagonistic, he's condescending, and his goal is going to be to try to make you lose your faith. And I thought, where can I sign up? Now, it wasn't because I wanted to lose my faith, but to be honest, I still had questions. And call me crazy, but I was raised to know that all truth is grounded in God in one way or another. So if something's true, I shouldn't be afraid to learn it. And I also knew that if Christianity were true, I needed to know why. But on the other hand, if Christianity is false, I'd still like to know why, and maybe this is God for the job. So here is the moment in my life and ministry that set me to where I am now, in a real sense. One day he walks into class, and he pulls out this antidepressant pill. And then he begins his lecture and says, religion wants us to believe in something like a soul that's supposed to be immaterial. And this is what gives us hope in the afterlife and seeing our family and friends that have gone before us. And according to Christianity, your emotions, your thoughts, your sensations are all supposed to be within this soul, which are also supposed to be immaterial. But the problem is, if I were to take this antidepressant pill, which is physical, it has a power to change and affect the alleged immaterial states of my soul. But how can that be? How can something tiny and physical have the power to affect the immaterial? Because every time we look at the brain, all scientists ever see are neurons firing. Every time we look at the body under a microscope, all we find are the base elements of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but no scientist has ever found anything even remotely close to something like a soul. So how do we explain this? Then he took a very profound pause and said, well, the answer is simple, and I'll tell you how. The answer is, there is no God. There is no heaven. There is no hell. There is no afterlife. There is no soul. You are just a physical brain and body, a meat machine, and we need to learn to live with this fact, get on with our lives, and stop believing in these fanciful, foolish fairy tales. Class dismissed. Now, sitting there, I was troubled for a few reasons. One, I had never met anyone that didn't believe in the soul, much less had I ever heard an argument against it. But what was even more troubling to me was, to paraphrase Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says essentially that if there is no resurrection of the dead, Christianity is false. All bets are off. And he goes as far as to say people should actually feel sorry for us for how gullible we are for believing this to begin with. Well, suffice to say, in a nutshell, according to Paul, if there is no resurrection, Christianity is false. Well, according to Christian doctrine, at the resurrection, it's not just my body being resurrected, but me, the self, the soul. But if there is no soul, then in principle, how can there be a resurrection? And by the same line of logic, if there's no soul and no resurrection, Christianity can't be true. So for the first time in my life, I heard an argument that, if true, would prove Christianity false. At that point, I had heard a lot of complaints about Christianity, but that doesn't make it false. But again, if this were true, it looked like, I was done for. Christianity would be false. So I could either ignore what he said or roll up my sleeves and get into philosophy, and that's essentially what I did. And long story short, 5 years, sometime after I graduated from this community college, it was actually my first public debate on God's existence at a church I didn't even attend. And that night, including online, there were about 600 people that showed up to that debate, and there were more atheists and Christians at church because of how influential this guy was.
Wow.
Okay, so that's cool.
But
no, what I want to highlight is that the fact that you hear, those kind of stories are just, ubiquitous. You hear these kind of stories all the time, where Christian kids who grow up in the church are not prepared for the challenges that await them. And for you, it was off at college.
Yeah.
And I know years ago when I would kind of do a talk for parents on like who's waiting for your kids, that was kind of the distant land out there, college land. That's where the real challenges are going to come. And we, and especially those of us who are working with young people, see those challenges pushed down much younger now.
That's right.
It's high school. It's the middle school teacher.
Yep.
I remember, our daughter in high school was at a public high school for 2 years, and it was freshman year, English class, I believe it was English class, and they were talking about he's just, I think he's commenting, or he's, taking a rabbit trail, but he ends up saying in class, hey, we know evolution's true. And as we evolve and we become more intelligent, we become less religious, and our daughter comes home. Well, here's what the teacher said. And that's just one little snapshot of the challenges as a freshman in high school. And we hear that. So the point is, I just want to highlight that story, because so many of us, we hear so many of those stories. And that should inform what we do now as parents. Yeah. Like thinking about, I've got 18 years maybe with you at home, maybe a little bit more. Part of what I need to think about is this future goal of wanting to send our kids out successfully, and we have to be intentional. And you grew up in a church where that wasn't the case. I grew up in a church where good-hearted people who love the Lord and doing good work, but this huge missing piece of a discipleship of the mind,
right?
Apologetic and worldview training, a Romans 12:2, transformation by the renewing of the mind with God's truth.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to highlight that, because we just hear so many of those stories as a reminder to parents. You've got to think about the long term And you got to be intentional in terms of equipping your kids to meet those challenges, because your story has a happy ending, so to speak.
Right.
There's so many stories that don't, of kids walking away from the faith.
Well, I was thinking about how at Maven we talk about parents, thinking about these different stages our kids go through in a different way. And the stage that we actually want to capitalize as parents is the stage where they are asking those questions. And little kids ask the most profound questions about God, like, what was God doing before he created, like you said, I think you said, was he just sitting there by himself in the dark,
Right. Yeah. What an idiot, right?
But they're
No,
thinking
he had a
about,
lamp. He had his own lamp.
Right.
but they're thinking about these big questions. And sometimes we aren't equipped to answer them, or there's been so many times I'm like, I don't know. I have never thought about that question before. And so we'll just kind of push it away, or the youth pastor or anyone in the church who doesn't know how to answer the question, and we'll just kind of say, oh, you're not really supposed to ask those questions, or this is a simple answer kind of thing. But actually, as parents, when they're asking questions, we want to engage them in that and nurture that inquisitive, help me make sense of that. Because we want to make sense of things because we're rational beings. I love how for you, it pushed you towards the philosophy atheist professor, because you wanted to hear, I think you wanted to hear better questions than probably you even had. He's pushing against things you've never thought of. And sadly, a lot of students go off, and this is the first time they've heard any objection to Christianity. It sounds really rational. It's coming from a PhD. And so what are our kids going to do?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if, part of it, I think, was your personality, because you're kind of a feisty guy. And so you were kind of ready for a fight, right? But so tell us about that, the class, and then what got you to actually debating, because that's going to take some training. So what did that do in you? Did you start reading apologetics, or where did it go from there?
Yeah, so good question. And even to touch on that whole, you're talking about the bringing up and stuff like that. What bothers me even to this day is how the church does not take these things very seriously. I remember sharing that story with this youth pastor once, and that person's response was, "Oh, well, my kids don't ask those questions." And my first thought was, oh, so forget me, right? I guess, so if I was in your youth group, just who cares about Eric? Which upsets me, and the Holy Spirit has to make me bite my tongue, because... And on top of that, too, it's also this mentality of like, those questions, it's just a small percentage. We don't need to reach those people. Or on the other hand, you have, another set of people who just think like, well, you just need to pray harder, just have more faith. Here's what's... So sometime after that debate I have with that professor, I think it was that night, if not the next time I saw him, I went up to him kind of tongue-in-cheek. And I said, I know you're an atheist, so I don't know how you're going to take this, but I just want to really thank you for allowing God to use you the way he did in my life, because if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. Now, here's what blows my mind. What got me into apologetics and philosophy wasn't a pastor, wasn't a Christian, wasn't a minister, wasn't somebody in the faith. It was two atheist philosophy professors. Because even if God wanted to use a Christian to inspire me to do this, he couldn't, because there were none in my life that did. Scripture, Jesus says, if you don't cry out to me, I'll get the rocks to do it. In my life, these were two atheist rocks that God used to cry out, because no Christian would. Jesus said something interesting in Matthew 5:13. It says, you're the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its purpose, it's not good for anything. The purpose of salt in ancient times was to preserve meat, right? They didn't have refrigerators, so you would use salt to preserve meat. Well, consider this. Biblically speaking, we're the salt of the earth. So the salt represents the church. The meat would represent the culture and world we live in. So naturally the question becomes, is the meat going bad? Absolutely. But here's the implicit point Christ is making. Suppose you go to the local market, buy a bag of salt, and you come home and you begin to add the salt to various pieces of meat. But then after some time, you notice something strange. You notice no matter how much salt you add or what type of meat it is, the meat continues to perish and spoil and rotten just as it normally would as if it had no salt to begin with. And if that continues to happen, then at some point you're going to have to step back and stop asking what's wrong with the meat. And at some point you have to step back and ask yourself what's wrong with the salt. So growing up, you hear these stories because, like you said, mine's a happy ending. Growing up, I would hear a lot of stories similar to mine, but with the opposite ending. But what blew my mind was, well, but why throw out the baby Jesus with the bathwater? If Christians are hypocritical or dumb or ignorant, which I would agree, a lot of them are, what does it have to do with whether or not Christianity is true? And for me, it was like, the church isn't doing its job, so I shouldn't abandon the church, but rather I should become and be the church and be the salt of the earth. You asked about debating. To not go too much deeper into the story, that the school that I went to, every semester they would do these roundtable discussions where they would pick different topics, politics, religion, you name it. And the semester I took my first class with that first professor, he said, if you come to this one, you can get extra credit if you write a paper about it. And I could use the extra credit, so I went. And it happened to be on religion. That's where I was first introduced to Peña. There were 4 people on stage. It was a Christian 40-year retired missionary, a Muslim, and then Professor Peña, an atheist, and maybe some other guy thrown in there. And every question they'd ask, the Christian would go first, and then Peña would just make her look stupid. It was something like, what role does religion play in our society? And she said something like, well, I'm a retired missionary. We build wells, we build hospitals, we feed the homeless, yada, yada. Then it came to the atheist, and he said, well, I do everything she does, and I don't need a motivation of not going to hell to do it. So, in fact, I don't do it for those reasons. And if you're doing it for those reasons, you're not even doing it for the right reason. About a whole hour of nothing but that. And I felt somebody needs to do a better job. And a friend of mine sitting next to me said, well, why don't you do it? And I said, well, I don't want to do it. I'm just saying somebody needs to do a better job, but not me. I've never set up my own debates. I do think I'm gifted for it, and I think you have to be kind of messed up in the head to do that, and I think I am.
I will confirm you are.
Yeah, right. I have ADHD, and that's a blessing and a curse because I can think quick on my feet, but I also forget to take out the trash when my wife asks me to. But that's another story. So all that to say, there are a lot of bad arguments against Christianity out there. And it's not that there aren't good answers, but the non-believing crowd tends to appear louder. But I've learned it's not that they're loud, it's that the church is, in comparison, just silent because they're not giving responses, at least not even good, substantial responses. So sometime after I graduated, I got a bachelor's in theology. My first professor, who was a chairman of the philosophy department, said, hey, we want to do the panel on religion again for the round table. Would you be willing to represent Christianity? I said, sure, who's going to be on the panel? Lo and behold, Peña was one of them. So that was kind of my first introduction to start getting into those kind of discussions.
So what books were you reading now? What were there certain apologetics books that kind of started to open your eyes to this sort of thing?
So one of the first books I really started digging my teeth into was Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview by my top 2 favorite, J.P. Moreland, who was my all-time favorite, and William N. Craig. 2 giants in philosophy, apologetics, and theology. But at first it was just really listening to a lot of Craig, what he was doing. And then because my issue was the soul that deals a lot with metaphysics, philosophy of mind, Craig's not an expert at that, but every time that would come up, he would mention his colleague, Dr. J.P. Moreland. So one day I'm like, let me look up who this guy is. Craig's probably the first guy I started listening to. So you also don't know who to listen to, don't know who to trust. So Moreland is an expert on the soul, wrote a book on the soul. And when I started listening to his stuff, I mean, it was just a breath of fresh air.
Well, actually, when our daughter was in 9th grade, she came home with that challenge of...
From that teacher.
Yeah, that teacher. As we evolve, we're getting smarter. As we're getting smarter, we're getting less religious. One of the things that we did in response was we asked our daughter, well, because we've exposed her to these kind of folks. We've exposed her intentionally to smart Christians. And we said, okay, what do you do with someone like J.P. Moreland, right?
Well, actually, she said to us, because you said to her, well, what did you think when he said that? And then she goes, well, the first thing I thought of was J.P. Moreland.
Oh, that's right. She thought of that on her own.
He's so smart. And we were like, wait, you didn't think of us? We were super offended. But then we were like, oh, it's okay. No, but really,
JP is a little bit
she
smarter.
said what came to mind was, well, wait, I know this super smart philosophy guy, and he's super smart, but he's also very committed to Jesus.
Yeah.
So when the teacher made the claim, it was like, well, that's not actually true.
That's right.
And,
So yeah.
And this is, I think this is a maybe symptomatic, or it's a commentary on modern evangelical Christianity, that the vast majority of Christians in our churches don't even know those names. They don't know J.P. Moreland. They
Right.
don't know William Lane Craig.
That's right.
They don't actually know the kind of important philosophical work, intellectual work, scholarly work that these men have done for the cause of Christ. And even if you don't read JP, even if you're not going to, look into substance dualism and, the mind-body problem or things like that, just to be aware that there are Christians out there who have thought deeply about this, who can engage and can go toe-to-toe with other scholarly non-Christians, is itself something that can strengthen one's faith. Like, hey, we got smart guys on our team here. And and being able to know who to point young people to when those questions do come up. And so...
Which I think leads well to our immersive experience trips and what we do with students.
Absolutely.
And how we love that you partner with us in leading these trips, because part of what we do with students is to expose them to arguments against Christianity, and then to show them there's really good answers. And people have been studying the answers to these questions actually for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years in some cases. So, so how should we?
So obviously you can tell listening to Eric, he's a smart guy. Not as smart as JP, but no.
No.
Eric's a smart guy. He knows his stuff.
But he did say, he wrote an endorsement for my book, and his first thing he said is, I love this book, and it should be taught in colleges and seminaries. So, just
Wow.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Whatever.
Pretty
That's
cool. A
really
hero
cool.
in the faith endorsing your book.
right.
That's nice. But so we've got this immersive experience program where we take young people, and the idea is, hey, let's give them the classroom training. Let's give them the book training. But ultimately, we got to get that training out of the classroom and into
right.
real life. And we need to model this and live this out while they're with us, so they can see how Christian truth how it can compete in the marketplace of ideas, how it can stand up against the challenges the culture throws at it. And so we do these immersive experiences. They're week-long trips where we have one that focuses on apologetics. And so we got one that focuses on biblical theology and scripture. We have one that focuses on worldview. And it's a challenge to find leaders for those trips, because they gotta know some stuff, right? And but sometimes you can know a lot of stuff, but you how do I put this nicely? You don't know how to relate to human beings, right? Like, there are those people, and God bless them, we need them. But
even more so, they wanting to spend time with students.
Yeah, well, that's and
who
so
will stay up till midnight.
We're going to put
talking
you, a week-long trip where you're leading students. So you can't just like people; you got to like students and some of the craziness that comes with it. So you got to do that. You got to be able to lead a little bit and administrate a little bit. So it's really a well-rounded person who has to be an immersive experience guide. And we thought, hey, Eric has 3 out of the 10 qualities we need. No, just kidding. As we got to know Eric, thought, man, this guy is going to be great with young people, and you are. And so it was last summer, not this past summer, but 2022, we brought you on as a field guide for Maven Immersive Experiences, and you've been leading them now. How many have you done? Do you know?
Going on 8, maybe?
You're already going on 8.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And so you've gone on these week-long trips. Now you've got 8 under your belts. Tell a little. We'd love to hear your perspective on these as a field guide. What do you think about these trips?
Yeah,
because I know what I think about them.
Yeah, I think every church, every person should do at least one of these trips. And once you do one, you're going to want to do more. I basically call them apologetic mission trips when I'm explaining to someone, because one, like you said, even with my kids, right? Like my daughter, especially, she's 14 now, but especially when she was younger, she would go travel with me, stuff like that, whenever she can. But every now and then I'd ask her, so why do you believe God exists? And I would just kind of push back, but just throw those things out there, because I would rather that doubt or those questions come into her mind while I'm around. I want her to be honest and open with me. I once heard someone say, not every Christian doubts their faith, only the ones that take it seriously do. So I want my kids to think. I want kids to think. And when I look out in the culture, I just don't see the church doing that, quite frankly. And that it boils my blood, and I think God uses that to motivate me, and I don't like that, but I guess it's what works. And what I love about these trips is, one, they're not your average mission trip, and I don't mean to say anything negative per se, although I don't mind saying something negative, but I think a lot of mission trips, you're patting yourself on the back. You're going, you're taking a few pictures with some kids without shoes, you're building a well, maybe, feeding them a little bit, and then you go home. What's problematic in some of those instances is that, without mentioning any organization or place in particular, here's an example.
Who do you think is doing missions really badly, Eric?
No.
So there's this church down the road. So I talked to a guy who who lived in Africa for so long, and he was a missionary, and he told me he stopped going. And here's one of the reasons he did. He said, a few years ago, they did a poll on how many people gave their life to Christ, but they polled every church that went there. Now, just to make up a number, let's say there are 10,000 people in this area in Africa. Well, it was reported that 30,000 gave their lives to Christ. Well, wait a minute, there's only 10,000 of them there. What's going on? Well, you get a church that comes and says, hey, we'll build you a well, and who wants to receive Jesus? Yeah, I'll receive Jesus. The next week, a different church comes, and they say, hey, we're going to build you a hospital. Who wants to receive Jesus? Yeah, I did it last week. Let's do it again. So it's almost like they feel indebted. Now, again, I'm not saying anything negative about that, but you go, you pat yourself on the back. We had this many salvations. On the other hand, you have, I've heard people say, oh, we went to this, country that's dominated by, this Muslim dictator, yada, yada, yada. Well, if you know anything about Islam, Muhammad is called the greatest of all deceivers. And, it's alleged that if Christians are nice to Muslims, it's because Allah has deceived you. But so if I'm witnessing to a Mormon, I'm not going to be aggressive. If I'm witnessing to a Muslim, I am going to be a little bit more aggressive because it's a different culture. So all that to say is that it can be interpreted, especially in Muslim countries, that if you're coming in doing work for them, they thank you, they do whatever you want to see done, and when they leave, they stand up and say, see, Allah has control over these people, and look what he's sending them to do for us. That's their mentality. All that to say, on these immersive experiences, sure, there are some feel-good things and moments, but it is boots on the ground, in your face, so to speak. Here's what we believe. Here's what others believe. Now, for 1 hour, we're going to bring in an atheist, and you're going to hear them talk for 30 minutes, and then you're going to have 30 minutes to ask some questions, and I'm not going to say a word, and when he leaves, we'll talk about it. And there's times where they will struggle. And we have to tell the parents, don't jump in and save them. Let them fall on their face. Let them experience that, because it's a good place to do it here. So we'll bring in atheists throughout the week, atheist philosopher, talk about divine hiddenness, the problem of evil. If your God's so good, why is X, Y, and Z? And sometimes they'll look at me like, what do I say? And I'm just like, this is your time, not mine. And then after that, and then throughout the week, they get better in their questions. We do debriefs. When they leave, we debrief. Okay, here's what he said. Here's some of the questions you asked. Here's what we can do, how we can do it better. But here's why all his arguments fell, and here's why Christianity is a much better representation of reality than what he had to say. And then get some rest. We're going to do the same thing tomorrow. And then after that, we're going to UCLA. We're going to go talk to students for 2 hours.
Yeah, we don't spiritually coddle kids. We throw them in there because they're high school students. So you got to be in high school or above. It's high school and college students that we take on these trips. And so we do the training beforehand, but they're still going to struggle. It's just like, you think about an athlete. An athlete can practice. Doesn't mean there isn't going to be struggle when they get out on the field. But what do they do after they get on the field? Maybe they get beat up a little bit and then they lose the game. They go back and they don't say, okay, game over, I'm done, I quit. All right. No, they go back and they go back to practice on Monday and they study game film. And they say, oh, look, here, here's where I made a mistake. And that's kind of what we're doing with the students in real time, right after as we debrief. And we help students see, oh, okay, here's where, the argument kind of fails. But you missed it. That's okay.
Right. Yeah.
But next time you're going to see it now. And even in those 6-7 days on that trip, we will see students grow leaps and bounds And I think part of it is because we don't coddle them. We let them struggle, and there's so much growth in that struggle. And by the time we get to the end of the week, it's pretty amazing what the Lord does in these students' lives. You see this incredible growth in their confidence, I think is the way to put it. You just see this confidence where that last day where they go onto campus and do more student surveys with skeptical students on a secular college campus. I mean, the very first day, they're scared to death. They're like, they're shaking, right? I don't want to do this. And they're going out in groups of 2s or 3s. And I always tell them, hey, it's going to be, you think in your mind, it's a lot worse than it really is. You're going to actually come back, and by the end of this week, this is going to be your favorite part. And it often is, because they get in some of the best conversations. But you just watch day after day after day where they grow in their confidence. In fact, do you, any stories stick out in your mind of students that you've seen where the Lord's really had an impact on?
Yeah, I mean, quite a few. I mean, there's been like one that's pretty common, so to speak, is, you'll have one kid at the beginning of the week, I mean, he is sweating bullets. I don't want to do this. I don't know if I can. Almost in tears, right? And, you help them. And again, we're not calling them, but we're like, hey, okay, how about this? I'll go with you. I'll start the conversation, then I'll walk off. Or, this, that, or the other. By the end of the week, I've lost count of how many students have started that way. And by the end of the week, they're ready, and they're the ones out there like running to the people and starting conversations. Yeah. And when they come back, almost like in tears too, but now in a good way, like, God used me to reach this person. We went to UCLA. I talked to a professor of anthropology who has a PhD, and we talked about this, that, and the other. And guess what he brought up? He brought up the stuff that you mentioned, that you taught us, and we were able to talk about this. And then he let me pray with them at the end. Now, are these people necessarily dropping to their knees and giving their lives to Christ? No. But one, that's the difference between gardening and harvesting, as our friend Greg Coco puts it. And two, these kids are being equipped, trained, and realizing anybody can do this, and I can do this.
Yeah.
What's amazing to me is, so some years ago, there was I think it was a Barna study that showed the literacy rate of the younger generations was horrible, right? Young people don't know the Bible. And then after that came out, it became popular for the older generation to kind of pick on millennials, until about 2 years ago, they did the same study with the older generation, and they found there wasn't much of a difference. These students leave knowing a lot more than some people who have been in church for 30 or 40 years, and they get a lot more experience and training in a few weeks.
Yeah. And in addition to the intellectual growth, there's this deep spiritual growth.
That's right.
Because it's not about, and this is the kind of training they get through Maven, it's not, hey, let's go own the atheists.
That's right.
In fact, we have those kids who will come with that attitude, like, oh, I'm going to own the atheists. I'm going to own the Mormon when we go to Utah. And we confront that. But the Lord confronts that too on these trips. And we watch the Holy Spirit break those students down. And we talk. So after an atheist guest comes out and he engages with our students and he walks out and we do our debrief, part of that debrief is, hey, and let's pray for him.
That's right.
Right? He is made in God's image. So what should be our response to him? It's not, oh, we owned him, or, oh, we kind of hate this guy, or he just irritates us. But no, what we see is the Lord starts breaking students' hearts for the lost. Yeah. And if you think about it, right? I mean, we have this Great Commission, which is the primary purpose of the New Testament church, right? The Great Commission. And so many young people who come on these trips have never once talked with anyone about Jesus. Yeah. And we wonder why they're so passionless about their faith, right? It's when we see these students start to partner in the cause of the gospel on these trips, where they're sometimes sharing the gospel for the very first time, we see them light up.
Yeah,
like they that passion just increases.
Yeah,
and they're actually now living out the Christian life the way it was intended to be, lived. So,
yeah, and I think you mentioned a little bit about, asking your daughter questions, and the biggest pushback we get about these trips is from parents or leaders who are like, you're going to basically expose these kids maybe to doubts they didn't even know were out there. And And like, this is crazy. You don't want to basically cause students to doubt. But what we find from the trips, that even the kids maybe who aren't asking those questions yet, what this sparks in them is a thoughtful Christianity that, oh, maybe there's questions other people have that I don't have, but these are actually good questions and I should have answers to these. And then it connects that knowledge of God. They grow in their knowledge of God because they're getting instruction and teaching on truth. They're seeing from us, hey, we're Christians that are not afraid to have conversations with atheists. We're not afraid to go to Utah and talk to some of the top guys in the Mormon church. We're not afraid to do that. Why? Because we believe Christianity is true. And so if it's true, then anything that's against it will have fault in it.
Right.
And so students see, oh, these guys aren't afraid to do this stuff. And so even in that, because what we know is that every person is going to experience doubt in one way or another, whether it's in high school or maybe it's later on when they go through a miscarriage or their marriage is falling apart,
Right.
or they lose a parent or they lose a child. These are the time, and so we're helping to instill in them a faith that is based on trust and on knowledge. And then, of course, the best part for me is what you talk about, the change you see in the students, not just in their knowledge, but connected then with the lost.
Yeah.
And students come back to the church that we're staying at night or wherever, and they will shed tears for the student they talk to on the Berkeley campus or the Mormon couple they talk to that doesn't believe what's true. And the student knows what that means. And the impact is profound.
Yeah. Now, there are a lot of groups. So one thing that we do is we take groups on these trips. So if you got a youth group or a college group or a Christian school, you could actually have your group go on one of these trips, book a trip with Maven, and we'll have an incredible field guide like Eric or other team of field guides who will lead those trips. But we've had a lot of parents who say, hey, maybe my youth pastor's not interested in this, or we just don't have a big enough group that will do this, or we're just maybe a homeschool co-op or something. Well, I want to kind of get on people's radar that we are doing an open enrollment trip next summer on July 14th through 20th. So maybe you just have a high school student that you want them to go on one of these trips. We have a trip where you can send them up to Utah, and our team is going to take them and walk them through this powerful experience with other Christian students. And so that's July 14th through 20th. You can go, if you're a parent who's listening and you want more information, go to our website, maventruth.com. At the top of the homepage there, it says Game Plan. Click on Game Plan, and then click on Immersive Experiences, and there will be an open enrollment tab that will give you all the information about that open enrollment trip. And so as Eric talks about these trips, as we talk about these trips, I just want parents to know that, hey, there's an opportunity next summer, July 14th through the 20th, for your kids to go.
And we love to point people to resources. The Maven Open Enrollment, this is the first time we're doing it, so send your students if you have them. But also, we love to point people to books. So I want to
And we only have a few minutes.
I know. So I want to end. I didn't want to end without letting people know about your book, but letting you kind of share
Wait, we have to highlight the name.
Well, I read the name earlier, but I do like the name, the
lazy approach to evangelism. Now, I know Eric well, and I just thought, okay, I would expect this from Eric. But Eric, there's got to be a twist here.
Yeah.
Tell us about the book.
So in a nutshell, I think it could be summed up in, or the heart, not summed up, the heart of the book, Colossians 4, 5, and 6, where I would say Paul gives us two goals when it comes to conversing with non-believers. And his overall theme is to keep the main thing, essentially. But in verse 5, he says to make the most use of your time with non-believers. And why the lazy approach, before I go into what Paul is saying? So back to the immersive experiences, we see the kids really have a heart for the lost, come back crying, be saying, I talked to this person, but they didn't give their life to Christ. Can we keep praying for them, or even exchange information? But there was one trip in particular that I won't mention who or where, when it was, but that was interesting. These kids were like knocking it out of the park, with every non-believing speaker that would come in. And on the last day, they had a speaker who, between us, wasn't a bright guy. He was a popularizer of atheism, but he wasn't a scholar. He wasn't a philosopher. He didn't know his stuff. His arguments were weak. They were terrible. So I thought, man, these kids are going to give him a run for their money. That was probably the worst they did all week. And I felt like a coach at the Super Bowl, and they missed the field goal. And I'm like, Now, there's a true story I once heard of this guy. He was a chess master. He was a philosophy professor. And he would play chess with his students. And he would always beat them really easy. Except for one student, they gave him the hardest time. The funny thing is, this student never played chess in his life. The problem was the professor thought, why did he make this move? And begins to overthink it and begin to overanalyze. And he gave him a hard time, not because he was good at chess, but because he had no idea where this guy was coming from. I think that's kind of what happened here. In the same vein, I see Christians do this a lot when it comes to evangelism. They overthink it. So the lazy approach comes from what's an approach I call the lazy approach. Coco helped me come up with the title, but the approach, I call it the lazy approach. Going back to Paul, make the most use of your time, keep the main thing, and then know how to answer everyone in verse 6. Paul says know how, not what. Evangelism is not a script. They say this, you say that. It's a know how, not what. Make the most use of your time. So in a nutshell, for the sake of time, here's an example. I had a young lady say, she told me she was an atheist. So I said, why are you an atheist? And she said, because I can only believe things that are backed up by logic and evidence. So I'm going to use her words, and I'm going to ask the next question. So what logic and evidence do you have for the belief there's no God? And she said, well, the Bible's full of contradictions. Now, most Christians here are going to immediately begin defending Scripture. This is where I call the lazy approach. My response wasn't to defend Scripture or give her evidence. I responded with a question. And how does that prove there's no God? And she looked stunned because no one's ever asked her that. It's as if she's never had to defend that. So to break the awkward silence, I said, let me put it this way. If God exists, did he exist before the Bible was written? And she said, well, I don't believe in God. I said, I understand that. But if he existed, did he exist before the Bible was written? She says, well, yeah, if he exists. I said, okay, great. So even if I concede the Bible's full of contradictions, I don't, but let's say it is, how would that prove that there is no God, or how would that make them stop disappearing, or how would that entail that atheism is true? What am I missing here? And in just 2 or 3 minutes with 2 or 3 questions, I plant a seed, I keep the main thing, and I know how to answer instead of what to answer. I'm avoiding heated debates, and I'm making the most use of my time. Lazy approach.
Very intriguing. And if you want to find out more or get a copy of Eric's book, where can they get it on any bookseller?
Amazon. Amazon's a good place. Maven Conferences is a great place as well.
Okay, and we'll put a link in the description so people can scroll down and link on that and find your book.
And if you are in Texas, Eric is with the Texas Baptists, and he does a lot of speaking in the States and partnering with churches. If they want to find information about what you're doing with the Texas Baptists, where do they go?
TexasApologetics.org.
TexasApologetics.org.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for being on the Maven Parent Podcast. Audience, thank you for sitting through the interview. There is a live audience here. Hopefully people can hear that. But thank you, audience. And thanks again, Eric. And we appreciate not only the book and what you're doing in your ministry, but the ministry you do at Maven. Oh,
go.
What did he say? Like the video?
Oh, okay.
Oh,
okay. Ready?
Sorry.
You want me to clap?
I can't listen and talk at the same time. Sorry. Go ahead. And
wait, let me clap.
Go ahead. We're super professional here.
Yeah, you're a professional.
And like the video on YouTube, and what else do we do? Click on the, I don't know the lingo. What is it? Say it again.
Just give a little shout out for the...
Okay, then you do that.
Okay, all right.
You just jump in and do that. I can't hear what he's saying.
Everyone gets a little behind the scenes look. They realize you're not perfect, Erin. You're not perfect.
They knew that.
Well, Eric, we appreciate also the friendship that we have, and look forward to years of partnering with you in ministry. Hey, if you're listening to the podcast, we encourage you to subscribe. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, or if you're watching on our YouTube channel, to subscribe, hit the like button, share this with other people, because what we try to do at the Maven Parent Podcast is take biblical truth, the Christian worldview, and put it together with practical application for families so that we can help our young people navigate this culture. So thanks for being with us.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.